well, values, I wanted to start from the program, but as you can see from the program, the first part of this workshop will be dedicated to the dissemination of the project results of the values. And then in a second session, we want to go a bit further and give the words to experts that are related to the topic of values to give us a bit of vision on where we can go with the values project. And then in the end, we can leave some time for a roundtable discussion to raise possible hot question and to give the words again to the speakers to answer to possible questions. So values has been funded by the National Research Fund of Luxembourg, the FNR, in 2014 within the funding scheme of the core, in particular the junior track, and was initially led, as Lucien introduced, by CRP Henri Tudor and in collaboration with CRP Gabriel Lippmann. We then merged in on 1st January 2015, and we became LIST. And other partners in this project are Affordable Futures, namely Rolf Bowmans, who is with us today, will present some concept related to the system dynamics, which served a little bit the scientific background for the project. The Vrije University Amsterdam, in the name of Kees Withagen and Reinhard Eyung's case, is also with us today, with regard to the supervision of a PhD work belonging to values. And then Professor Duccio Rocchini from the University of Trento, Italy, who covered the role of mentor of the PI. This is why it's called junior track. So the PI, I was the PI, has this coverage of expertise, and in particular the figure of the mentor. So starting from the beginning, the main focus of values was ecosystem services. So I guess most of you knows the concept, but to trace a little bit, ecosystem services are by definition all those ecological functions, processes, and characteristics of the ecosystem which can contribute to the well-being of the people. So in other words, are those benefits we can get out of the nature. And there are several categories, several scale of analysis, several methods, tools to evaluate and assess ecosystem services. One of them, probably the most known framework to assess ecosystem services, is the one of the related to the cascade model. So it's on your right, is where basically we want to assess what are the effects of a certain human intervention on the ecosystem through a pressure on the environment. This pressure can cause a change in the structure of the ecosystems, which can then affect the functioning of the ecosystem, and then later on in cascade the type of service and eventually the benefit and the value for the society. So that's a bit the overall background related to the ecosystem services concept, but our group, let's say, is a life cycle assessment group. So life cycle assessment, again, most of you probably know, is a well-known methodology to evaluate environmental impacts related to products and services over a supply chain. And is basically composed by two main phases. One of these is the life cycle inventory, where we account for the impact, for the inputs and outputs in terms of environmental intervention, so the extraction of raw materials, land uses, use of energy, and related emissions during the life cycle of the product investigated. And then there is the second part, is where we do the assessment. Say, okay, so what does it mean having an environmental intervention? What does this provide to the ecosystems? And is where the scientific community develop characterization models. Characterization models are those models that bring basically the life cycle inventory results into an impact on the environment. And there are different indicators to assess the impacts on ecosystems, which are calculated basically through the means of an instrument which is called characterization factor. So the characterization factor is it's a means to translate an environmental intervention, so for example, the utilization of land, into an impact, such as, for example, the disappeared fractional species in the environment. So for each impact category, there are different type of characterization factors. But when we wrote the proposal of values, there was no, at that time, sufficient knowledge on how to address the impact on ecosystem services. That was why we decided to address this kind of knowledge gap. And then during the last 4 years, there has been some developments, basically concerning the evaluation of land use impacts, related impacts on ecosystem services. But still, we missed a little bit the knowledge of the ecosystem itself. So, and the knowledge of the functioning of the ecosystem and how the human actions can affect the functioning of ecosystems. And we identified two main reasons for further investigating those issues. Basically, the fact that the ecosystem service concept as a whole was not sufficiently encompassed within the cause-effect chain models currently investigated by the practice of life cycle impact assessment. And another reason was that all the feedback processes and non-linear effects which influence the functioning of ecosystems were not considered in those models. And so there was a kind of limitation on how to incorporate the damages and the beneficial aspects related to the ecosystem services. Later on, research has advanced, especially considering the land use as a main driver for assessing the impacts on ecosystem services. Different tools have been developed, but still this part on the integration between the different cause and effect pathways is not encompassed. So in 2013, more or less, we developed the first proof of concept where we tried to explore the potential of using a kind of integrated ecological economic model, specifically the Gambo model developed by Royal Moments. And we explored some possibilities to use the results of simulating the effect of the functioning of ecosystems in relation to possible interventions at the level of the economic sphere. So what happens if I extract 1 ton of oil or I extract 1 meter cube of groundwater on the ecosystem, the surrounding ecosystem, and how these affect later on the cause-effect chain. So we conclude that an integrated model was a possible solution to support the evaluation in LCA of the ecosystem services. So to answer the question on how to assess the support given by the ecosystem services, and especially then the impact of human actions on the provision of ecosystem services, we had two objectives. So the first objective was to develop an original methodology on how to calculate new characterization factors for LCA related to ecosystem services, according to a more spatially explicit, time-dependent characterization, and then to apply this modeling framework to let's say, a real context of land use change, which was the one of Luxembourg. And in particular, in Luxembourg, we identified the carbon sequestration and the pollination service as main priority ecosystem services, also in terms of course, data availability to create a kind of modeling test bed. So this was basically the history that brought to values, and we now move a bit further to see what values has produced. Before, however, we'd like to give the floor to Roel for 10 minutes of introduction to the concept of system dynamics, which was, as I said, a bit the basis to create this kind of integrated modeling exercise.
Thank you.
Please, Roel.